I would like to welcome you to the panel discussion, to our first panel discussion on China. This morning we have three speakers. Professor Ming-Ke He from Beijing Technology and Business University, and he's going to share his thoughts on how traditional and social media are reshaping the new China. Then we have Professor Jeremy Wallace. He is currently teaching at Yale University, and he's going to talk about the changes in China, and the title of his presentation is Has China Reached a Turning Point? And finally, we have Professor Xiaohong of International Business Department here at Quinnipiac University, and Professor He is going to talk about internationalization of Chinese currency. The Dean of the School of Business, Professor Matt O'Connor, will be moderating this session. So I would now give the floor to Matt O'Connor, who will formally introduce the speakers and facilitate the session. Thank you.
Thank you, Mohammed. Can you guys hear me in the back? Can you? Yeah, okay. I'll let you guys use those. All right. Well, as Mohammed said, I'm Matt O'Connor. I'm the Dean of the Business School, and I want to welcome you all to our opening panel discussion. Before we get started, there's two announcements I want to make. The first announcement is for people in the audience and for our panelists. This is during normal class time, so there are going to be students coming in and out of the room. They're not being rude, or they're not really late for the session, they're not leaving before it's over. It's just they're going to be on their way to and from exams and presentations. It is towards the end of the year, so some of the students can't get out of class for the entire time of the panel. So please excuse them in advance if they do have to leave or they come in a little late. And our second announcement is there are some student ambassadors here. Could I have the student ambassadors stand up for just a minute? Are they here? If you have any questions throughout the day, they have name tags and to identify them. But please utilize the student ambassadors. If you have questions, they can help you throughout the day. So the panel discussion is going to work in the following way. I'll introduce each of the panelists. I'll invite each of them to give remarks. We're going to ask them to limit their remarks to about 10 minutes. I'll be a little bit firm if you start going over 10 minutes, so that we have plenty of time for questions and answers. So your job as in the audience is, once the three opening remarks are concluded, the purpose here is to give you the chance to ask questions of our distinguished panelists. So I would invite you to either start thinking about questions, or as they go through their presentations, to please get some questions in mind so that we can have a lively discussion after the introductory remarks. To my left, your right, we have Professor He Ming-Ke. Dr. He is Professor of Business at Beijing Technology and Business University. He is Director of the International Office at BTBU, and also Vice President of the China Federation of Logistics and Purchasing. He's Vice Chairman of the China Society of Logistics, Deputy Director of the Supervisory Committee for Higher Logistics Education in the Ministry of Education in China. In 2011, he received the Hans Olvogern Purchasing Research Award, and his research interests include supply chain management, logistics, systems theory, distribution network analysis and planning, electronic commerce, and its distribution. He's published more than 100 papers and 12 books, and he completed 2 projects sponsored by WTO-related organizations, 6 national-level research projects, and more than 30 other projects. Professor He was visiting professor at Gothenburg University in Sweden from 2002 through 2007. He also worked in the UK for a brief period. Please join me in welcoming Professor He. Immediately to Professor He's left and your right, we have Jeremy Wallace. Jeremy is an assistant professor of political science at The Ohio State University. He is currently a visiting assistant professor at Yale University's Macmillan Center for International and Area Studies. His research focuses on the politics of non-democracies, particularly China, as well as urbanization, development, and redistribution. He is working on a book manuscript, Cities and Stability, Urbanization, Migration, and Authoritarian Resilience in China, which examines how cities represent serious threats to autocratic regimes and how the Chinese Communist Party has managed its urbanization to maintain its rule. Please join me in welcoming Professor Wallace. And on the far end, we have another Professor Ha. We have Professor Xiaohong Ha, who is Professor of International Business at Quinnipiac University. Professor Ha obtained her BS in Mechanical Engineering from Jilin Institute of Technology in China, and later her MA, MS, and Ph.D. degrees from the University of Texas at Dallas. Her current research focuses on social entrepreneurship and foreign direct investment. Recipient of numerous awards, Professor Ha has published her research around the world, including presenting her research around the world as well. She has also authored a number of books and monographs. Please join me in welcoming Professor Xiaohong Ha. And so at this point, I'd like to ask Professor Minka Ha to provide his opening remarks. And we have till about 5 after if you want to kind of keep an eye on the clock.
Dear Dean and dear guests and the students, teachers, students, thank you very much for your invitation. It's my great honor to be invited to participate in this seminar, and especially for this panel discussion. It's very important. Firstly, I would like to take some minutes to say some words about Professor Jonathan. Your remark, I think. Thank you very much for your study in China. I think that I've learned a lot. Just now you have introduced some factors about Chinese history, right? Because you know in China we have 5,000 years history. It's very difficult for every Chinese people to learn the total history. But you have got the deep understanding, and you have provided a lot of very in-depth facts about China. Just now, because of the time, I have a question, but I think I remain to be asked afterwards. What's your comments about the relationship between China and the United States in the future? I think it is most important for our generation, you know. So afterwards, I think that I will learn from you. Thank you very much. As you have heard just now from the introduction of Dean, my major is not this topic. My major is distribution, logistics, supply chain management, etc. But as a Chinese, I think that today's topic for this panel discussion is associated with every people. Okay, every people, especially in my generation, were heavily impacted by the social media, especially nowadays, the mobile media, etc. So it is very important for us, for me especially, as a Chinese, I would like to provide some information for you to understand Chinese current situation better. Okay, the topic for me is how traditional and social media are reshaping the new China. I think it is very important. People's present, if you are not Chinese, I think that a lot of you have visited China. For example, I think that you have visited China for many times. You have noticed the change in the last 30 years. Okay, every aspect. Especially in the last 10 years, I think, in terms of the media, changed heavily. 30 years ago, or 10 years ago even, Chinese media, I think this is strictly supervised by the central government and local government, as you know. If you want to publish a message in a newspaper, it should be supervised, censored, okay, by government, by local authority. But now it's difficult for the government to do that. Okay, that's the most important influence of the social media nowadays, I think. So, because this is a very big topic, I just want to share my opinion with you from the following 3 aspects. Firstly, I just want to provide some some factors, some information for you. In terms of the social media, I think that the most important platform is the mobile phone. Okay, internet. Now in China, according to some statistics, at the end of last year, China is the biggest in the world mobile phone market. Okay, we have 500 million mobile phone users. So it's the largest in the world. It's almost double than United States. And also the development rate is about more than 20% every year. This changed a lot. My son and his classmate in high school, every day they use a mobile phone for about 10 hours. Yes. So they watch no television. They read no newspapers, but just use a mobile phone. Okay? They buy from the mobile phone everything, even from overseas, right? They pay. And they get information, get everything. They contact with their classmates. And so this is a big size. And I think that even in countryside, a lot of farmers, Chinese farmers, they have a mobile phone for their produces to be sold internationally. Okay, so this is huge. Of course, we have a lot of other factors. Now, in China, we have a Ministry of Industry and Information in charge of the social media, I think, the infrastructure of social media. Okay, now recently there is a discussion about the charge of another platform for people to transform short messages through another new phone. Okay, for example, my mobile phone, we can send a message, okay, send a short message. But now there is a operator provide another platform. You can send your message, but without charge. Also, you can send pictures. You can do a lot of other things. Okay, just like Facebook and Twitter in your country. So this is very marvelous, and more and more netizens use this kind of platform. And this, I think, that will change a lot as well. So this is a basic fact. And according to this, because of this platform establishment, and there are some changes. Firstly, from the perspective of society, okay, I just want to tell you to discuss three things. One is society, another one, the second is economy, the third one is politics, okay, because of the social media. Chinese society is changing rapidly in the last 30 years, especially in the last 10 years because of the social media. Because we have a mobile phone, and we have internet, we have other things like similarly, and people, I think that get a lot of benefit from this. The first thing is we have free our mind. This may be very important for Chinese people. Okay, for Westerners, I think that you can. Maybe you don't understand what's my meaning. 30 years, people in China, I think that your idea, your mind is settled, okay? It's constrained. Now it's free. Because of, we can get information from everywhere. We can know if you know English, you can get English message, English news directly, instantly, okay? But before, no. If you want to know something about America, if Chinese and American relationship is not good, then the Chinese government stopped the message. But now it is open, right? So now we can think everything. It's free. I think it's one of the prerequisites for the development of the society. This is the first thing. Second thing is the cultural exchange. Okay, 30 years ago, because China is closed to the outside world, but in the last 30 years we opened the door, and more exchange, bilateral exchanges, right? A lot of visitors from foreign countries to China, and now more and more Chinese people, especially young people, young students, they go to foreign universities to study. And this kind of exchange in culture is essential, is very vital for the development of China. Very interesting fact is that 30 years ago, if a Chinese student studied in the United States, they are sure they will decide to stay in the United States forever. But nowadays, it's changing. Okay, more and more Chinese students go to the United States, including Quinnipiac University. You will have more and more students from my university, right?
Yes.
Yeah, they decide not to stay here, but just return. Because China, we have more opportunities for them to find jobs, to develop themselves, right? Why they have this? They think that through the exchange, okay, when they study in foreign universities, stay with foreign students, and they can share a lot of different cultures, right? They can understand the difference. But one thing, they understand that the potential is in China. Because China and the United States and developed countries, the difference is too big. That's to say that opportunity. We need to develop. Okay. So this is the help of the social media. The third thing is the reshaping of the social relationship. Okay. Traditionally, people and people, organization and organization, people and the government, the relationship is totally different from nowadays. Okay, because of the social media and everything, information is open, so it is very easy for general people access to everything, happened anywhere, anytime. So people, it's very important. We need to understand. We can understand other easily, okay, and we know the difference. In China, we say that we have a lot of traditional words in China. For example, about the minority. Okay, this is a very interesting thing. When I communicate with foreign visitors in foreign countries about a minority, China, I think the majority nationality is Han dynasty. You know that is Han, right? Is Han. But we have a lot of minorities, like we have more than 56 minorities. But in terms of population, they are just a few parts of China, Chinese people, right? And then the difference between the different minorities is very big, okay? And now because we have social media, and every people, even those minorities, they know, oh, they have such kind of rights. They need to be respected. They need to be treated as how the Han people treated. Okay, so they also naturally they will require the government to do something for them, and the government realize that, oh, we need to respect the minority. So I think that the relationship between different nationalities now is much improved than before. Okay, so lastly, I think that from the social media, the Chinese society is much developed in the last 30 years. Because we have a lot of people exchange, we have a lot of culture exchange from outside the world, and then this is nutrition, I think, for the development. But there are some problems for the social media to the society development. The most important, I think it is the very tough thing is how to supervise the social media, because in China, because the larger population and the history, the government pay more attention to the social stability. You know, social stability is the first thing. Under these circumstances, and the government, the country can have the condition for development. Otherwise, the journalism research studied China well. In the last 100 years, China, the inner, okay, because we have a lot of wars, inner war, and a lot of war is not good. Now, we think that since in the last 30 years, Chinese people know that stability for the society, for the country is the first thing. Okay? We can develop at a slow pace, but if there is a war, inner war or a war against with other countries, then it's a disaster for the development. I don't think the central government, the people, just want to do that. So, in order to maintain the social stability, and the government say that the social media should be supervised well. For example, recently, just last week, in China there is a virus distributed heavily. You know that H7N9, okay? Yeah. It's a flu. Yeah, the flu, yeah. There are some fake information about that. Some people, they just distribute, oh, there is a distribution about this flu in what area. But actually, no. A lot of people who get the information from the mobile get panic, okay? So this is, I think this is the thing the government need to pay more attention to supervise the media. This is the first from the point of view of the social. The second one is from the economic side, and Chinese economy is developing very fast. And you know, we have a new government. We have a new president, President Xi. He's very young. I think that maybe you know him. And the development of economy in the next 30 years, I think, in China, we would say that it almost be assured at a high speed, about 80% annually. So that's marvelous. We think that social media will play a very important role. For example, supplier and customers' relationship in the last 30 years changed vitally, I think. Traditionally, if a supplier wants to distribute a product, it will have advertisements on newspapers and those traditional channels. But now we have multiple channels. Especially recent few years, electronic commerce in China is developed very fast, large scale. And in China, we have settled a problem of a payment by mobile phone. Okay? So this is a very important mechanism. So now we have this one, and then manufacturers and the distributors and suppliers, every supplier can finish their transaction with their customers through mobile phone, through social media. Okay? Because we'll have such kind of a platform, and then it's very easy for them to distribute the information about the products, about their companies, about their prices, etc. Okay. Yesterday we met a student now studying in the United States. One of my students, he studied here, and he established a company to buy American products to sell to China. The only channel is this. So it's amazing. He's very successful. It's very good. And another thing is that the market, big market for games, for reading, and for other things. So this is very important, and for charging. Another example I would like to share with you. In China, we have a Spring Festival. Traditionally, every Chinese people, friends, we need to exchange messages short messages. Okay, every day when there is a festival, and then the operator make a lot of money from this. The last thing is the politics. As from the government side, this one is very important because now people can find the information to say that if an official is in bureaucracy, there is bribery, okay, taking bribery, and in bureaucracy, the government say, oh, we need to collect this information and then to take some actions. So this is also very important. Last of all is that social media actually is very important for China and reshaping China. And we benefit a lot from this. I think that it will do a lot of more things than nowadays. Thank you very much. That's my short speech.
Jeremy, you want to provide your opening remarks now?
I will. I'm going to try to speak without the microphone. Can everyone hear me in the back? So I want to thank everyone. I want to thank the previous speakers and for this opportunity to speak here. The title of my talk is a question. Has China reached a turning point? My answer to that question is to say that it appears that China has reached 4 different turning points. So depending on whether you believe that the question is one turning point or many, I suppose it's either a yes or a no. But having reached 4 different turning points at about the same time, it makes it very hard to assess or predict where China will end up going. Because if you turn 4 times, you can basically end up going in almost any direction. So I'm going to talk about these 4 turning points, kind of first list out what I think they are, and then talk about them, and then talk about kind of where this may lead, my sense about where China's future may be. So the 4 turning points that I have in mind are the following. The first 2 relate to urbanization, which is the study, or which is what the subject of my own research. The first would be what I refer to, or is referred to often as the Louisian turning point, referring to Arthur Lewis, the Nobel-winning economist. The 2010 census that China did showed that China now is over 50% urbanized, and that this transition from rural to urban China is a major transition and a turning point, perhaps. Second is that the regime seems to be moving towards the development of larger cities as opposed to smaller cities, and that this, again, is a turning point because the regime, particularly in the past 30 years, but in fact since 1949, has tried to spread out urbanization across many different cities, but that this might be a change that is coming forward. Third is that China's transition from an investment and export-based economy to one that is more consumption-based. That this seems to be something that seems to be happening finally after people talking about it for a long period of time. Fourth and finally, that China's rapid economic growth seems to finally run headlong into environmental consequences of that growth, and that this is something increasingly that the regime and the people of China are going to have to deal with. So I'm going to talk about each of these 4 turning points before coming to kind of the general question of where China is headed. So this Louisian turning point, which is named for the Nobel-winning economist Arthur Lewis and his model of surplus labor. And to simplify that model, basically it states that as long as a society has extra laborers in the countryside, they can move to the much more productive industrial sector and have rapid economic growth, while the country can both keep wages low and thus the industrial sector competitive and keep agricultural production high because it's surplus labor. It's not producing that much in the agricultural sector. China's rapid economic growth over the past 30 years has taken advantage and kind of followed this model in many ways. That has moved workers and people from the countryside to the industrial sector, and that's in large part the rapid economic growth. But increasingly, a lot of that surplus labor has moved away, has already moved to the industrial sector, and it increasingly seems to be the case that, that China has kind of moved away from having any surplus labor, or not as much as it used to have. You can see this by the rapid increases in wages for factory workers and others, and so it seems as if it has moved away from this situation of surplus labor. In other words, China has reached the Louisian turning point, which implies that we'll have to find growth, economic growth, in other ways. One possible path could be seen, that is, one other way that China can find economic growth, can be seen in discussions over changes in the way that China should urbanize. So this is the second turning point, that the regime used to consistently promote small and medium cities over large ones. Since the beginning of the CCP rule in 1949, the regime is worried about urban instability. And from the regime's perspective, rightly so, since most non-democratic regimes that have just one large city actually are much more prone to collapse than those that face spread out urbanization across many different cities. This is the subject of some of my research. Yet this is counterintuitive to China scholars because we all know that Chairman Mao had a famous saying that a single spark can start a prairie fire, meaning that anywhere in the country something can happen that can affect the regime. And Mao is, of course, right in this sense that a single spark can start a prairie fire. But what I argue as a social scientist is that it's much more likely for a prairie fire to start if you have many sparks concentrated in a particular area. And thus that whereas rural instability in China, which is seen, is much less likely to damage the regime in a kind of fundamental way, as opposed to the large-scale protests in urban areas, such as we saw in 1989, and that it is these concerns about urban areas that have kind of shaped China's policies for many years. So the regime has dealt with the possibility of urban unrest by biasing its policies in favor of cities. That is, making sure that people in urban areas are taken care of, that they have, traditionally this is referred to as the iron rice bowl, that urban workers have a security from the moment they're born until they die, that they're taken care of. But in the 1950s, when China was developing along this model, this Soviet model of economic development, farmers who were paying for the building of these factories realized that they were getting the short end of the stick. And they smartly realized that they could, rather than pay these taxes to build factories, they could go get these factory jobs themselves. And so China faced a problem of farmers blindly flowing to favored cities, Mangliu. And that this problem, the regime limited the abilities of farmers to migrate. This is China's hukou system. These migration restrictions have reformed in the reform era after Mao's death, but remain barriers to those born in the countryside interested in moving to cities. These restrictions have been lowered for smaller cities, but the walls outside larger cities remain tall. It has been suggested that the regime believes that it needs to encourage growth in its larger cities now to promote innovation, creativity, and productivity, despite the potential dangers of urban unrest that might arise from having so many crammed together, so closely together, and to the seats of economic and political power. This debate can be summarized by two different Chinese phrases that both translate to the English urbanize. This is chengshihua, that is urbanization of cities, versus chengzhenhua, urbanization of towns. It appears possible that China will move away from the latter towards the former, though that previously in kind of China has tried to push people or encourage migrants, farmers, to move to smaller scale cities rather than large ones. But that might be changing because in general, we know that economic growth happens, creativity and such tends to happen in larger urban communities than in smaller ones. And so as China has no longer the ability to just move people from unproductive agricultural work to industrial work, there is an idea that it needs to move towards a service sector economy in larger cities. And that this service sector economy, building larger cities, will also encourage a shift away from investment in exports towards consumption. And that this is a long-term trajectory for China. So it's well known that China is particularly dependent on selling goods to others, that is outside of China, right, exports, and investing resources for its future to achieve the high rates of economic growth that have characterized it for the past 30 years. Yet this too seems to be changing. The Great Recession or global financial crisis is a study in contrast on this point. So the global financial crisis we think of as something affecting the West, and we think of as China as not particularly affected, but actually more people lost their jobs in China than anywhere else in the world. Right? Americans and Europeans, all of a sudden their homes were worth less, their stock portfolios all of a sudden were not as valuable, and so what they did, they stopped buying Chinese-made goods. And what did Chinese factory owners do when they faced the situation of dropping demand is they did what factory owners anywhere in the world did. They laid off their workers. And so these migrant workers faced a choice. They lived in these cities, these urban areas where factories were, but they didn't have jobs. And they didn't have any support system because one of the migration restrictions, essentially there's a separation of social services, that if you're not born in an urban area, then you don't get social services in that urban area. So if one were to move to Hamden and lose your job, you would be able to collect unemployment in Hamden. But if you move to Shenzhen and you lose your job, you're not collecting unemployment benefits in Shenzhen. So by the millions, these workers dispersed back to the countryside. And that this, so kind of, in many ways, I argue that the global financial crisis kind of shows two different ways, and actually a third. You just kind of brought up the minority issue and it made me think of something else, a third kind of issue. So the first, the global financial crisis showed that the world is not enough for China, that China is now so big and growing so rapidly that it can't count on external demand to continue its factories and its growth. And so it has to have internal demand for its own goods and services to continue growth. And second, one of the ways that the regime dealt with the financial crisis and this drop of demand was by stimulating the economy, by investing incredible amounts in infrastructure and kind of building more roads and high-speed trains that are a pleasure to ride on and make one very jealous when you're on Metro North or Amtrak in the United States. But by investing such incredible amounts in infrastructure today and in the past few years, the regime has realized increasingly that it needs to shift its economy away from such investment before they become increasingly more uneconomical projects. Right? You've already built high-speed networks and the highways from large city to large city. Increasingly, these types of investments will be bridges to nowhere or white elephants. But the third idea, this kind of minority idea, is interesting as well, that the internet, and one of the kind of dangers of this transition for the regime or for the Chinese society is that when people lose work, then all of a sudden lose their jobs. This is a dangerous situation. People are upset. And one of the things that happened in the crisis, in Guangdong province, which is a southern, oh, we lost the map, the southern China that near Hong Kong, kind of exports is the home of a third of exports from China to the rest of the world. A particular factory had brought in minority workers from Xinjiang province to this factory and kind of displacing other workers, and there was a conflict between these sets of workers. There was some violence between these workers, and rather than have it be like kind of just stay at home in Guangdong at this factory, news of this violence across racial groups in China kind of spread out across the world, but also to Xinjiang, where these workers were from, and led to incredible violence in Urumqi, the capital of Xinjiang. And so that this kind of shows in the way in which the social media and information on our phones can kind of transmit and make issues in one part of the country kind of across the entire nation. So at some level, though, the fourth transition, the fourth turning point is kind of like China's growth running into its own problems, so that even promoting consumption can be difficult because as millions and millions of Chinese buy their first appliances and cars, the environmental consequences of such purchases make themselves known. Those of you who have ever tried to run in Beijing are very aware of the difficulties of doing so and that air pollution is a serious problem. And if the fundamental social contract that the regime operates under is a trade-off of growth for stability, many Chinese, I would argue, are wondering whether growth has anything for them. What good is a car if you're stuck in traffic and can't actually get anywhere? Or an apartment in a city with air quality so pitiful that simply walking around is dangerous. So I would argue that China has reached a turning point or many turning points, and that predicting where China is headed is a difficult task. Last year, the World Bank with the Chinese State Council released a very interesting document called China 2030, building a modern, harmonious, and creative society. And I would suggest that anyone who's interested in kind of seeing a best case scenario turn to that document. It's full of titles such as green development, increasing innovation, strengthening the fiscal system, achieving mutual beneficial relations with other countries, and so on. But what is missing in that document is politics. The Chinese Communist Party is never mentioned as an important actor, and kind of social stability amidst all of these changes is assumed. And I think that China faces many turning points, and the idea is whether the kind of question, I think it is still an open question, is whether China will navigate them safely and what paths the country, party, and people will be on at the end of the ride. So I think it's an exciting time to be studying China and thinking about China. And so I look forward to all of your questions. Thanks.
Xiaohong, I'll invite you to provide the final set of remarks, but
Before
also
that, I just wondered what that
we're
document
gonna
was.
do questions at the end.
Okay.
Yeah,
But
okay.
Keep in mind the time because we do
Yeah,
want to.
10 minutes or less, right?
Yeah.
Okay. 10 minutes or so. Okay, but anyhow, I try to cut this very short. But this renminbi, which is Chinese currency internationalization, seems like it's a very technical subject, not like the previous two subjects so relevant for most students to get access to it. Let me give you just tap into Professor Spence's topic. If you look at China and U.S. relationship, past several periods, when China was very poor in 1500 or 1600, American or West look at China is very sympathetic. People are very backward with a tail, bent feet, and things like that. And then later on, when China start to develop, and it's a kind of mystery because China's civilization is totally developed, separate from the Europe. So this is a mystery. And then later on, during the World War II, and China become a major allies for United States. And that relationship is keep the very close relationship even with communist government, at the end of the war, till that period. And then during the Cold War, China and U.S. become very hostile. And then when Deng Xiaoping opened the door policy, China become admired by Americans, developed so quickly, and then become strategic partner. At this point, China becomes second largest economy and become a challenge in this country, seems like. So from now on forward, whether China going to some period in the past or we develop a kind of cooperation period for peace. So this is in that scenario, I think when the capitalism started from industrial capitalism to financial capitalism, renminbi play a big role in this. So this is the big context why this topic is important. Second, you probably all aware that the past 2 years there are two conferences called BRIC Summit. One is in India, another one is in South Africa. Just happened very recently, about a few weeks ago, and especially in the developing country after 2008 crisis, financial crisis. So people are outside United States very frustrated about use sovereignty currency as a major world reserve currency, which is collect tax from all over the world to pay the debt. Okay. Second is the Bretton Woods institutions, which is the World Bank and IMF, is under stress. It's not, people question whether it's up to the task and whether or not they can reform internally. So within that context, internationalization of renminbi have some implications to what is happening. Now, in terms of internationalization of renminbi, we have to talk about three things. My talk is to talk about that. And then internalization, I wouldn't think Chinese renminbi is going to globalize anytime soon. However, Asianization or regionalization is under the way. It's happened very, very fast. And second, I'm going to talk about is the current status, give you a big picture. We talk about current status, what is going on, and then talk about the cost and benefit to China as well as to the world. And then my own speculation usually is dangerous. What is going from here, okay? And especially with the relationship with the dollar. Okay, in terms of regionalization, if you look at China's influence, a recent economic article already talking about Southeast Asia is already becoming, it's called the renminbi block or renminbi standard. They exaggerated, but there are some data to support it. The China's trade basically world trade, 52% is regional. And then if you look at the settlement, is in Chinese currency is larger than that. It's about more than 60% settled in Chinese currency in the Asian region. So it's regionalization is take place. And especially this development very fast, especially I have data for the past 2 years from 2009 and 2011, just to give you a kind of idea. The renminbi settlement started in 2009 is 3.6 billion. Right now, in end of 2011, is about 500 billion. So you can see it's 140 times growth just in 2 years. And in terms of companies who settle their trade with China in renminbi, increased from 335 companies, now is about 70,000 companies. All those things happened in 2 years. So you're dealing with China, that is the speed. And then if you look at China, whether it's going to threaten US dollars as a world reserve currency, you have to look at 3 things. Reserve currency, there are 3 positions. One is settlement currency, another one is invoice currency, another one is reserve currency. And I just want to tell you a little bit, share with you about what is the current status. As an invoice currency, China is far away from it because if you look at major commodities, it's not priced in dollar. And everybody you talk to in China, big firms, leaders, they all say we don't have a price power. Even though China is the biggest buyer of all the major commodities in the world, China do not have a price power. It's priced in dollars. So that is way, it's way behind. It's 10 years to develop. Second is China as an investment currency that is developed very, very fast. And 14 countries has been invested in renminbi-denominated bond issues. And then World Bank in 2011, Asian Development Bank, and companies like McDonald's already issue bonds, which is, they issue debt in renminbi-denominated, debt. However, in terms of world share, it's only about 3% at the current status. In terms of China as reserved currency, and Thailand, Malaysia, Cambodia, Nigeria has announced to use renminbi as their reserved currency. And in terms of China, the offshore development for Chinese currencies, currently for spot market, it's already happened in Singapore, in London, and also in Tokyo and in Chicago. On the derivative market side, which is already issued, non-deliverable forward contracts is being traded. So those are the things we're talking about, the new development, how China, as an invoice currency, settlement currency, as well as the reserve currency, as this development speed is very fast, but currently, in terms of world market share, it's very, very tiny. We're talking about 3% or less. Now, in terms of that, how that benefit or cost to for Chinese companies, people, and the economic development, I just give you a brief headline. I have a lot of data, but I will short it. Okay, one is to reduce Chinese cost of borrowing and promote international trade. Because when the demand for China's currency goes up, then the price goes up, yield curve yields goes down. So it's cheaper for China, and also they reduce the foreign exchange risk for China to trade, and also increase Chinese people's purchase power. Chinese currency has been in the last decade, less than a decade, has been appreciated 30% or more. So it's good for students coming here to study, and also enhance Chinese political power and reduce its dependency on US dollars, because China's more than $3 trillion reserve, high percentage of those is in dollars. And in terms of on the trade side, as Jeremy mentioned, China is facing a mid-income trap. at this point. It's a turning point. So last 10 years is very, very important for China to develop economically, politically, and militarily what type of approach or path China is going towards. So it's a very critical period to see where China is heading. On the capital account side, when renminbi internationalized, not necessarily good for China, given the political environment, because it's very conventional central bank intervention pulled so many liquidity from Japan, from US, and all those countries into place, can really, add the financial instability, to China, particular. And also another one is called the trade dilemma, which is when country's currency become reserve currency, you have to run a large trade surplus when the capital account is not open, or which capital account is not, limited or controlled. Third thing is that, in terms of reduce, and also these things have caused China's, if Chinese currency keep internationalized and reduce China's domestic policy autonomy. And lastly, currently China have, facing a lot of geopolitics conflicts. We know the peninsula, Korea Peninsula, and also, with Japan, all those problems can add, destabilize the Chinese currency, and which means that, can add cost to China's development. Okay, and I'm going to short it. And in terms of,
Xiaohong, can you just try to wrap it up because we don't have time.
Yeah, just one more. Okay, how that going to affect the world, which is risk diversification effect, which means when China add into the one of the alternative currency, can increase the liquidity and add additional hedge and reduce cost of the capital, and also can diversify or can reduce U.S. role as a lender of the last resort, can help the world development. And from where we are going, I think China right now probably is good for China to pursuing a regional, regional cooperation with major currencies in the region, as well as cooperate with BRIC countries to exchange for peace, other than internationalize own currency, try to become world reserve currency. So that's end of it. Thank you.
This time we'd like to open it up for questions. So if you do have a question, stand up. Mohammed, do we have a mic out in the audience? Here, you can use this one. Well, while you guys are thinking of questions, I have a question to follow up with Professor He. And that is, you mentioned that it's important for the Chinese government to supervise social media. And you gave an example, it was an interesting example. But from a Western point of view, the notion of supervising something like social media would be a little bit foreign to us. So I wonder if you could help us understand why you think it's important, or why the Chinese government thinks it's important to supervise social media, as opposed to maybe a more Western view, which is to maybe try to liberalize social media and have fewer controls.
Yeah, it's a very good question. I think that from the point of view of Chinese media, the management did not, in Chinese government we have organization all the way since 1949, and in charge of the newspapers and publications and other things, right? I think previously this organization is the main target, main responsibility is to supervise, okay, or something. To some extent, I think it is censor the publication, something like that. But nowadays, because of the change of the media, and the organization also changed. This time we just have a new government now since this March, and the responsibility of the government also changed greatly. Now I would say that the main responsibility of this government is to monitor the media. I think it's not it's not supervised, because supervised is past time. It's past, okay. Nowadays, there is no necessary, or it's impossible for the government to supervise, because we have a lot of private investors in social media. For example, we also have some papers, newspapers. We have some publication publishing houses. They are privately investors. Okay, as long as they abide by the Chinese law, related law, I think the government has no way to supervise it. Okay, but to monitor it, that's because that, as I just explained that in China, because we have two large people. Okay, we have differences. We have a big difference in from countryside to city to farmers, right? From Han to other minorities. So it's important for the government to guarantee every people to get the right information, especially the official right information. So the government needs to monitor the media. But it's not to say the government need to control. Of course, sometimes I think, from some point of view, if necessary, the government can do that. For a special proposal, for example, just now I explained the flu, right? Mm-hmm. Yeah, and other things. Okay. One example is that some competitor, I think it was 3 years ago, a farmer, in order to compete against his competitor, distribute information to say that, oh, your fruit is bad than mine, and send short messages through mobile phone, and then that farmer, all of the fruits produced by that farmer has no way to sort out. So this is a problem. Mm-hmm. So the government say that way, I need to trace that information. Okay, who distributed this fake information? Okay, and then that distributor need to take some law responsibility. So I think that nowadays we think Chinese media is not controlled by the government, but the government has a responsibility to monitor it and to support the development. So it's changing. Yeah. Thank you very much.
Question over here, and then we'll go over here.
I have both a comment and a question. The comment. Okay. You said that the minorities are all treated well. This is not quite. I think you were not considering the sophistication of your audience. The Uyghurs and all the Western Muslim groups are definitely having a serious problem in China. The Tibetans, there's been 100 monks that have burned themselves to death. Mass of Han have moved into the Tibetan areas. The masses of Han have moved into the Western areas. So that the population of the indigenous people there has been compromised. So it's not all that rosy. Another comment is concerning the social media. You make it seem as it's sort of an economic thing, but it's the New York Times writes an article, so now you can't get the New York Times unless you go through a back door. You know, YouTube, you can't use YouTube. I mean, I can go on and on. It's and again, I'm not saying whether I would, if I was them, be doing it or not doing it. But what I'm saying is you have to be honest with us and say, you know, they are controlling what kind of differences the people might have with the government. Anyway.
So let me just throw that open to all three of our.
Yeah.
So one is, you know, minorities in China. You know, what's the current situation there? And the second is social media. This transition from controlling to monitoring. How far along are we, and how much further do we have to go?
So I would argue that I think there is on the internet and social media in particular, I think the Chinese internet is sometimes viewed in the West as kind of a barren 1984 type of place where no one can speak and nothing happens. And the Chinese internet is extremely lively and innovative. Weibo, the Chinese Twitter, is much, much better than actual Twitter in terms of what you can do and like the ability to communicate. And the vast, vast majority of communication is not censored. What is censored or supervised or controlled, whatever word we want to put on it, is political content, and particularly less political content about this policy should change, but we should get together to kind of to protest, or we should get together to try, I mean, people don't even bother saying we should get together to take down the regime. That's not something that, right, that's a self-censorship issue. The regime doesn't even have to censor that because it doesn't happen. But I think so. There is a lively like social media internet that is interesting and important, but there is this censorship apparatus is there, but it's not the whole story. On the minority issue, I think that's a difficult one in the sense that the Chinese, like the argument is that they're bringing economic development to these regions, right? That's the regime's argument as to it's promoting economic development in these regions, and Chinese people are moving to these regions to take opportunities. The minorities themselves may feel like they didn't have a choice in this policy, like we didn't choose to be developed, we didn't choose to have more people come into our regions. And I think that's a real difficulty and kind of a real conflict between those who prefer the kind of to be rich but more connected to China and lose some of their own native autonomy, their own local culture, and those who kind of would make the opposite choice. So I think those are hard choices.
Well, the minorities, of course, feel like second-class citizens because they get the lesser jobs in Tibet or Western China. Other people have moved in,
right.
Moved in, and they feel like second-class citizens in their own region.
Yeah.
But I had a question when they asked.
Just because there are other people, so I'd like to.
Yeah, I think just thank you very much for your explanation, and thank you very much about your question just now. He explained well about the minority treatment, right? Development just now you will see that they find jobs. The fact is that in China, cities, big especially cities, they have very good conditions, okay? But in rural area, I think that the difference with Beijing, Shanghai is very big. All of the people live in farmers in rural area. They just want to go to Beijing to find jobs. Okay, they want to go to Shanghai, but you know how many people now in Beijing, in Shanghai? Beijing, Shanghai cannot hold whole China. So just now he explained a very good turning point. So the Chinese government's idea now is to turn the few bigger cities into a lot of small and medium-sized cities, and then a lot of local people can find jobs locally. For example, just now it's not only Tibet, but in other areas, in Yunnan, in Gansu, in Mongolia, all of the people, they have the same problem, okay? If they go to Beijing, and I think Beijing has no way to provide too many jobs for everyone. So the things that the government need to develop themselves, okay? To have very good regional development and to find jobs there. This is the way. So urbanization in China, next round of development, maybe is one of the strategic target for us. And then this problem will be solved. So we would see that the difference between different places are very big in China.
No, I'm going to move it over. Very interesting questions, but we do have other people that want to ask questions. So.
The proliferation of social media is fascinating in China, and in the U.S., we're using it to build relationships with our customers. So this is a two-part question. Part one is, Here we're using LinkedIn, Facebook. What are the emerging platforms that people in China are using for social media? And how can those of us in the West perhaps join the conversations that you're having to start building relationships with individuals in China?
Yeah, it's a very good question. Yeah. I think the most important target barrier for the people to communicate between Chinese people and the Western people is the language. For myself, I think that it's very easy for me to access to Facebook and to exchange views with my friends in the United States, in Western countries, right? You can do the same. I think in China we have our own platform. A few people know Facebook and Twitter, okay, because all of the information in English. Now in China, only those people who learn English, they can use in English, they can access to that. They just want to access to that because they know nothing. It's very difficult for them to understand or to express their ideas in English, right? But we have our own platform like Ren, the young student, QQ, and Weibo. Yeah, that's right. For their age, they have.
Yeah, let's open. Yeah. Let's have students. We have a lot of Chinese students and faculties here. Let them to respond. Yeah.
Showed some of my classmates of the Chinese Facebook and Chinese Twitter that we use. And so far, because I always log on those, like all those American students, the frequency you log into your Facebook. So, and there are some advertisements and there are a lot of information of those international companies like KPMG and PhD, and a lot of they are throwing their recruiting information on those platforms. And I think that is a very good way. And I think the Chinese Facebook runs exactly the same way. American, like the English, the real Facebook runs. So yeah, as long as you can have a translator to do the just the language thing, and the rest of the thing is exactly the same.
You know that this is a market. It's a market. The operator want to make money. If they have a lot of registers, and then audience they can make money, right?
Yeah.
So the platform is there, but language is a challenge for Western people to know Chinese people, and the Chinese people, they can distribute, they can have their comments as they wish, right? They can criticize the government even, no problem. They can see an official, okay, and provide some information. So, for example, one thing, I see a public car, now stop at the gate of a park. So we need to check what's the proposal of that. I see the public car stop at other place, other than the public department, and the government say, oh, I will look through it, okay? So it's very much transparent now. He has a very good comment just now. He said that the government do have some inspection about if you distribute some political comments, okay, or especially is illegal. I think that maybe the government need to do something right. But normally this is free. Okay, thank you very much.
I think we have one more question more, or we're done? Okay, because we have to go over to the next thing. So, well, let's give our panelists a round of applause.